Button on. Right. Okay. We're delighted to welcome everyone again to another one of these Breakfast and Learn sessions. We've been going strong now for since March on the Zoom basis since March 2020. So about 15 months now, although we were meeting in person before that. And maybe next month or the month after, if Boris allows us, we will go back to meeting face to face over a croissant and coffee at breakfast at Hedger United. Let's see what happens. Oh, that's not our call, it's Boris's call. Okay, Rabbi Wilkinson, welcome to our session. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'd like to hear what goes on the other side of Edgware in the other United Synagogue in Edgware. So that would be interesting to have your views on that. But anyway, welcome, and we look forward to hear some words of terror from you this morning.
I didn't realize that I was speaking about the other side of Edgware. I also feel a little bit guilty being introduced as being from the other side of Edgware, as I'm closer to you than Rabbi Lister is. I think because we pass when I go to shul on morning, we pass on the way, because so I'm really on your side of Edgware. What can I say? First of all, thanks to Rabbi Lister for obviously Tillim and Mishber, and we wish all the Cholim for Shalema, not only Cholim who were mentioned, but other Cholim as well. We should have a Refuah Shalema, and anyone who is in need of a Refuah should have a Refuah. I also thank Rabbi Lister for everything, all the guidance he's given to Ahavat Yisrael over the years. It is appreciated and very much appreciated. And I get chizuk when I pass him, as I say, occasionally on the way to shul. I do get chizuk from him, and for that I'm grateful. And also thanks to Stephen. Also thanks to Stephen for inviting me today. And I didn't realize I should have realized, but I didn't realize it'd be such a choshev crowd, such a eminent crowd of speakers with judges and everything else. I'm slightly intimidated by my audience, but let's see what we can do. Whenever a Jew is asked to speak, we're told it's actually quite easy for us. Indeed, it is quite easy, because we always have subject matter. We can either talk about the parsha of the week, or we can talk about the parsha of next week, or the parsha of last week, or we just talk about the sefer that we're in, or we just talk about Torah generally, or we talk about the time of the year. So let's see what I can bring together. But I want to begin unusually when we're talking about the parsha of Balak, which has got in itself so much. I want to actually begin with something from last week. And the reason I would begin with something from last week is a famous Ramban, but there is, at the beginning of last week's Pasha Chukat, there is I think, a fascinating comment from Rav Soloveitchik that in a way informs the way I try and learn and the way I try and share Torah. So I just want to share that with you, just want to share this idea with you, and then pull back to the Pasha of today. As we know, last week began with Zot Chukat HaTorah. This is the statute of the Torah. And as Rav Soloveitchik says, and as we all know, the Chukim were classified by the Rabbonim as unintelligible, enigmatic, and mysterious. That we know. And then he says, though it's forbidden to ask for the reasoning pertaining to certain divine categorical imperatives, we may inquire into the interpretation of the law. And there is a difference between explanation and interpretation. And he gives an example. He says, take physics. Now, I apologize, my knowledge of physics can possibly be written on the back of what we used to use to stick on letters when we had such things in the old days to write to people. But he said, physics doesn't ask why, because why is not a scientific question. It's a metaphysical question. There can be no scientific why for water freezing at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, or for light traveling at 186,000 miles per second. Asking why Hashem issued certain commandments is seeking to comprehend the unfathomable. Man must recognize that the ultimate reason for mitzvot is beyond his grasp. The very question of why, in regard to a mitzvah observance, is philosophically invalid. Strong words. He then goes on to say, when we ask why in the context of human activity, we're truly asking what motivated him. Motivation carries an implication of an unrealized need. But with regard to the divine, Rav Soloveitchik continues, it's impossible to ascribe motivation to Hashem because he has neither needs nor deficiencies. Thus, in response to the question of why Hashem created the world, we can't answer that it's because he is kind and wanted to bestow goodness to this world. This assertion implies that Hashem has some vague need to do good. The only acceptable answer is he willed it. However, says Rav Soloveitchik, the question what can be asked. What is the meaning of this chok? And he goes further. He said, what is the meaning of this chok so far as I am concerned? What does this chok tell me? One doesn't ask, why did Hashem legislate para aduma, or how does it purify the ritually defiled? But one can ask, what is its spiritual message to me? Or how can I, as a thinking and feeling person, assimilate it into my world outlook? And I think that's the key way that we have to look, or I try and look at Torah. What is its spiritual message to me? Or how can I, as a thinking and feeling person, assimilate it into my world outlook? And with that background, let's turn to today's Parsha, to Balak. What is Balak saying to me? How can I take something from the Parsha and change my life? Because that's really the challenge to all of us. We have to look at the Parsha and see what it says to us. Now, the Parsha of Balak, as we know, it is become increasingly problematic. I used to love talking about it and said, who's ever heard of a talking donkey? And of course, Disney wrecked that one because everyone's heard of a talking donkey. And then I say, whoever hears of transport talking to you? And nowadays we walk into our cars and our cars talk to us and tell us what to do. So clearly there's nothing there about it. But there must be something in the Parsha that speaks to me at any time and tells me how to control my life. Now, really, if we think about it, the curses that Bilam wanted to give to us created the most difficult experience that the Bnei Israel were ever going to have, because there had never previously been a plot to uproot the Jewish people from their source and separate them completely spiritually from Hashem. Because what he wanted to do was actually make a decree that would completely break away our connection with them. It's very interesting, really, as an aside. The Zohar Kodesh says that the first two letters of Bilam and Balak form the word Bilbel, confuse, because the plan of Bilam, which was really the most severe form of impurity to try and impose on us, was to confuse the Jewish people so that we should not realize our own greatness and the degree to which we're attached to Hashem. And maybe that's a point we can start thinking about. We've got to realize our own greatness and how we're attached to Hashem, and take that as well, that every Jew is great and attached to Hashem. And bear that in mind as we go through, because we have to realize that every single one of us is great and has an attachment to Hashem. But what happens in the Parsha? We know about the donkey, but we then have this sudden situation where Bilam goes into different places to give his curses over Bnei Israel. And if you look at the text in detail, it's very interesting. The first attempt to curse the Jewish people, Bilam positioned himself, as we know, on the heights, overlooking the encampment of the Bnei Israel, and he looked down on these unsuspecting multitudes, and then he mentions his first bracha, the first curse that turns to a bracha. But remember, he positions himself on the heights. And Bilam at that stage is forced to confront the fact that Israel is not a cursed nation. It's a unique people, and we are a unique people distinguished from other nations of the world. Stunned by this, Balak removes Bilam from there and he says, look, let's try again from a different position. And this time we know that Bilam is stationed so he can only see a fringe of Yisrael. And it's the hope at that stage that Bilam can focus, so hope not of us, of course, but of Balak, that Bilam can focus Hashem's anger on the outcasts of those who linger on the trail on the edge of the camp. Maybe those who are slightly off the derech, those ones who are not included. And maybe they hope that the idea that looking at these weaker ones, then the curse will be effective. What happens? Relocated, Bilam looks down on this side. He's looking from above, looking down on the people who are to the side. And again, we have a parable, a wonderful parable with a bracha. And then, of course, not deterred, in the hope that he'll still be able to achieve his designs, what does Balak do? He again shifts his nation and again has him on a third time looking down at Bnei Israel to curse the Bnei Israel. And this time, as we know, he faces the desert and looks in a way away from Israel and looks at the history. And again, of course, we have the famous words, Ma tovu alecha. Now, I think that is all very significant and very important and has a massive lesson for us. It's the whole idea of these curses, the words of Bilam are fascinating because there was a discussion in the Gemara in Brachot as to whether all these parashiot should be included in our tefillah of every day alongside the Shema. Now, I think for most of us that'd be absolutely unbelievable. We say Shema every day. It's the essence of our faith, and we're told we should perhaps, or the rabbis consider in the Gemara, that perhaps we should include the whole story of Bilam in that. Now, how on earth are we then going to get davening done in 30 minutes if we included that? Maybe that was the reason why they didn't include it. But let's think of the essence. There's something here that is telling us that it is so important that it needs to be included. And I think there is a massive lesson here for all of us to take. As we know, Ma tovu is included at the start of Tefillah when we go into a Bet Knesset. It's an unusual thing. We have this supposed curse that turns into a bracha. And we're actually told that it's the only one that will remain a bracha throughout the time. Again, because we're told in the Gemara that in Gemara in Sanhedrin that all of the blessings of Balaam were only temporary and reverted to curse at a later stage, except for Ma tovu. Ma tovu that we include when we go into Bet Knesset. Now, it's fascinating. If you realize we say this at the start of our morning prayer. The Magen Avraham says that before we begin our morning prayer, we should take upon ourselves the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, to love your fellow as yourself. By doing this, we make our tefillah not just a dialogue between ourselves and Hashem, but we connect ourselves to Knesset Yisrael and make it a dialogue between the Jewish nation and Hashem. And that is why we say Ma tovu. Because what are we doing? What are the basic building blocks of our love of our fellow Jew, it's nothing less than loyalty and responsibility to both Hashem and the Jewish people. And where are these virtues nurtured? In the family relationship. And that's why we look at the family and we look at the homes and the tents and we give a bracha for that. But I think there is another reason why we say Matovo. I'd like to suggest this. And I have a slight authority for my suggestion, which I will bring in a minute. I emphasized as I was going through that what happened, Bilam looked down, he looked from a distance. And I think some of the message that is coming through the time of the 3 weeks is don't look so closely at everyone else. You don't use a microscope to look at your fellow Jew. What you do is you have to do as Bilam did. He looked from a distance. And if you look from a distance, you see the beauty of the landscape. You see the beauty of the people. You see the beauty of the Jewish people. You don't take a magnifying glass and say, oh, that person did this, that person did that. That's not what we're being told to do. And I think that is part of the reason why we're having this idea of this Pasha just before the beginning of the 3 weeks to say, look at the whole of the Jewish people. Look at them from a distance. Look at that beauty of the Jewish people. As the unified whole, the unified camp. Yes, the people on the edges, they're still included. They're still connected. In whatever tiny way, they are still connected and part of the Jewish people. And we have to remember that. And maybe that's why we're being told before we walk into the Bet Knesset, we have to look at everyone positively from a distance and say, yes, that's what's reminding me. That's my connection to the Jewish people. Now, how do I get that? And how do I get to that? There's a famous story told of the Aptarov. I'm sure Rabbi Lister knows this one. The Aptarov claimed that the mitzvah, to love every Jew, can be found implicitly in every Pasha. And one year he decided that he was going to speak about this every week. It came to Pasha's Balak and he found it very, very hard to connect the concept of the Pasha because the entire Pasha is from the perspective of Bilam, who was not part of Klal Yisrael. How on earth do you get the Haftarecha Kamocha? As he walked up, and you can imagine him walking up to the shul like Ezra United, he's walking up to the pulpit to give the drosha. He's trying to think of where is the connection. And then he said, actually, I've realized where the connection is. The connection, the Haftarecha Kamocha, is right at the beginning of the Pasha. So he said that the 3 letters of Balak stand for V'Haftarecha Kamocha. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, the congregation was a very learned congregation, and they were a little bit shocked because the spelling is wrong. V'Hafta begins with a vav, not a bet. Kamocha begins with a haf, not a kuf. And they say, look, Rabbi, what are you talking about? And the Aptarov explained, if you keep nitpicking like this, you'll never really love your fellow Jew. Love means willingness to overlook the minor flaws. And I think that is the idea that comes to us from the Pasha. Look from the distance. Don't look with a magnifying glass. Look at the whole. And that way, we can love our fellow and we can learn at the start of this period of the 3 weeks to look generally and to be positive. Now, I've spent a lot of time, Baruch Hashem, being able to learn through works of Rav Kook, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, and Rav Kook talks about the destruction of the second Beit Mikdash, and he mentions, as we all know, that the idea of the second Beit Mikdash being destroyed was through sinat chinam, baseless hatred. He said, how do we overcome that? And we've got to have baseless love. what I would like to suggest is fine saying about the idea of looking from a distance, fine saying, yes, v'ahavta kamocha is the idea that comes from Balak, but I think we've got to do something practical. And what I'd like to suggest really at this time, and it's a chutzpah of me, and I apologize for this chutzpah, you can take this on board or ignore it. The past year, 18 months, has been incredibly difficult for people. It's been an isolating experience. We haven't seen people, we haven't been in touch with people. We haven't encountered the people in the street we would normally encounter in the street. Yes, we send texts, yes, we maybe think about them. But I'd like to suggest we do a practical loving our fellow during the next few weeks. We're often told that during the 3 weeks, you avoid machlokas. We know that. You avoid buying new things. We know that. If you're in a family situation, you're nice to your family. But I think we have to go beyond that. I think we have to actually look at the wider community. And what I'd ask, and I'm asking everyone I speak to, I'm actually saying this to Jew and non-Jew. If there is someone you haven't spoken to for a year, and I'm saying spoken to for a year, pick up the phone or knock on their door and say hello. It doesn't mean someone you've had an argument with. It may just be someone you haven't seen for a year for all sorts of reasons. Just pick up the phone and say, hello, how are you? And I'm not saying send a text. That's not it. Pick up the phone. Say hello to them. Don't leave a message on the answer phone. Just say, you know what? I care about you. You're my fellow. I want to connect with you again. Just ask them how they are. Try and do one a week between now and after Tisha B'Av. And you know what? We'll all change the world. If we take that on board, we'll change the world and we'll actually move to what we're meant to be doing, to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash very speedily in our days. I hope you're all well. I hope you stay well. I hope you stay healthy. I thank Stephen again for inviting me. I thank Rabbi Lister. And if we take this on board, we can do so much together positively to actually show that we are a light amongst the nations and we can actually really demonstrate v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Have a good week and thank you again.
Thank you so much. Everyone can unmute themselves now. Thank you so much for those inspiring words and a good message for about the Sedra and also about the 3 weeks coming up. So thank you so much. So I see life does take place on the other side of Edgware, and sure you inspire your community every Shabbos with talks like that. Very, very nice. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today, have a good week, everyone, and an easy fast on Sunday for those who are fasting. And we'll see you all again next Tuesday, and I'll give you details of the speaker later on in the week. Thanks again, Rabbi Wilkinson, and thanks everyone for joining us. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.